why do the Sixers look so different today than they did at the end of the year? Tom Moore, longtime Sixer guy, columnist, and you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Moore Philly, sports columnist for the Bucks County Courier-Times, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Tom, welcome. How are you, pal?
I'm okay. Here I got back not too long ago from Sixers rookie camp, and I'm here writing my column, and you're talking about being barefoot in the sand and all these good things. It doesn't seem like it's, for some reason, one situation seems better than the other. I don't know.
Yeah. Hanging out in Camden doesn't push your pile?
No, just doing work. That's all. It's not necessarily
work in general.
I have nothing against Camden. You know, the facility's nice and all, but you're trying to get this column done. But yes, the very different look and some surprises. I think to some degree, especially the Redick thing. I mean, clearly he couldn't be a priority for them because they had to address the two major guys. But the fact that he would go out and jump, maybe they told him, that they were thinking of another 1-year deal and he wanted a little bit more stability, not have his third straight 1-year contract, which it would have been if he stayed here. Or maybe they told him they were moving on from him. I don't know, but that was surprising. That was one of the first things that Woj, laid out there, and that was kind of really out of left field. Nobody seemed to see that coming.
Yeah, that was really the first move that happened. JJ signs with the Pelicans, so he's gone, and then after that, Tobias Harris. What do you think, Tom? It was a case of they picked one over the other. I mean, is that becoming apparent to you, or why is Tobias Harris here and Jimmy Butler not?
I think a couple reasons. I think one, basketball-wise, obviously, Butler, you can argue, was their best player in that series against the Raptors, certainly in the fourth quarter. Had the knack for scoring when they needed to score, distributing, whatever they needed to do. But I think they see Tobias Harris as kind of a better teammate, makes less waves, and I think they believe that without Butler there, who was such a factor in the fourth quarter, I think they think that Harris can be have more impact down the stretch. And I think Butler not being here makes it easier on Simmons because, let's face it, his role is the facilitator. And if Butler's out there playing point guard, what is Ben Simmons going to do? And I think it makes it a little easier on Brett Brown, too. The infamous kind of questioning publicly at the film session out in Portland at the end of last December. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but, I think it's kind of like a loose cannon. You just wonder, you're not sure. And I think Tobias Harris is much more stable in terms of, you know what you're going to get from him. He's a good teammate. He's respectful. And Al Horford's the same way. What a great guy he is, how popular he is, how his teammates love him. And I think clearly that was something that they were looking for. And that is a common thread, with all these guys that they've added or brought back.
When you look at this starting five now, Tom, potential starting five, however you want to phrase it, they got a lot better on defense. It seems like they're going to be able to do a lot of damage on the perimeter. They're lengthy, athletic. You have the veteran that can stretch the floor in Horford. You have Embiid there as the mainstay in the front court. And then you obviously have Simmons and Richardson and Tobias Harris. But on the flip side, on the offensive end, it's still questioning Simmons and what he's going to bring to the table this year. It's questioning where's the shooting coming from and is there going to be spacing issues. So when you look at both sides of the basketball floor with this starting five, what really sticks out for you? Is it the questions surrounding the new offensive identity, or is it the potential for how good of a defensive team this five can be?
Yeah, I mean, clearly without Redick, who was not, it wasn't even close to, that he was their best three-point shooter, and they looked for him and all those dribble handoffs, DHOs they call them. They ran so often. He was always moving. He would get the ball square up quickly, and shoot it pretty well. But the other side of the coin, at the defensive end, he was. I mean, the net series they would run pick and roll, and whoever got on Redick was the guy that took them to the basket. They kind of identified like a shark in the water. I'm really curious at the defensive end, honestly, who's going to defend threes? Because Tobias Harris, is an okay defender with fours, but in this league, the twos and the threes are really tough. I could see them trying Harris, on threes. He's been primarily a power forward the last X number of years. But I could see Simmons ending up defending a decent number of threes too. Maybe moves his feet a little bit better, than Harris. Harris is pretty athletic. I'm not saying that. But that's one thing that I would be concerned about, just a little bit. And also, is Horford your starting four and your backup five, which right now would probably be the case. So Mike Scott has to, is going to play a fair amount. And let's say 20 games Embiid doesn't play to try to get him healthy for the playoffs. You clearly need another big body in there who would be Horford's backup if Horford started at center in those situations. You need a backup point guard, and you probably need a backup shooter. I saw Wesley Matthews, signed a one-year deal with the Bucks. Unfortunately, I thought he would have been a really good fit here at the wing. He's a very good defender, good size, can score, good free throw shooter, does a lot of things well. I think they have a little over $7 million in the cap, and they have some needs that they need to address, because it all comes down to, Brett Brown talks about 8 guys in the playoffs. So what's your 8-man rotation? And that was part of the problem against the Raptors. They really only had 7 guys you could count on. There was no backup center. And right now you have 6 for sure. And the 7th, you wonder, could it be Matisse Thybulle? Could it be Zaire Smith, who are essentially the same player? And, who's your backup, who's your scorer off the bench, and who's your backup point guard? So there are some things, while I like what they've done, and it was pretty dramatic. Little concerned with 4 years. The 4 years I thought was a little much for Horford. I'm not sure who they were bidding against. He'll be 37 in the last year of that contract, but I really like him. You look around the NBA, I don't know any other player in the league who does a good job defending Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid as he did in the playoffs in 18. I don't know any other guy that has the skill set, the size, quick enough for for Simmons, but strong enough for Embiid. So he's an incredibly versatile guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to get your take, Tom, because you've seen Brett Brown almost every game he's ever coached, and got to watch him a lot with Dario here. How do you envision Horford fitting in on the offensive side with Embiid? Do you see him being used as like that classic stretch four, like they tried to do with Dario? What is the way that you see him fitting in offensively?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike, because the last 2 years he shot a little over 39% from three. He's a very good shooter from the outside, but he's also a very good free throw shooter, and he's a high percentage guy inside. He's got a nice mid-range game. I think that's one of the things they really like about him is his versatility at both ends of the court. If Embiid's in shape and he can run 80 feet up and down the court every possession and post him up, I think you will find Horford, more on the perimeter or foul line or whatever. But I think if, when Embiid's not in the game, or if Embiid's, not playing, or, a little winded, you can post him up and you can get production from him, down low. He's also an excellent passer. He averaged over 5 assists last year. He averaged 1.5 blocks. I mean, he really is a stat machine. As a 33-year-old guy, all the things that he can do on the court. And as I said, how you realize that Elton Brand was a teammate of Al Horford and Mike Scott in Atlanta. I mean, how crazy is that?
Huh. I knew that he played with Horford. I didn't realize he played with Scott too.
Yeah,
but
I think it was 1 year.
Very interesting
Scott,
because
yeah.
he brought Scott back. Yeah, so he brings Scott back. Obviously, they have some work to do on this bench, and we'll get into that with Tom Moore. But first, Tom, who takes the last shot on this team? I mean, did somebody get put on notice when Jimmy Butler got sent out the door? Who on the current roster got put on notice, or is there, it's just, are they going to set plays up for Horford? Are they going to set plays up for, because it was Jimmy Butler, clearly. It was him that was getting the ball late in the game. He's not an option anymore.
Well, I mean, if Embiid's healthy, I would think he's a more viable option. And as I say, my sense is they think that Tobias Harris can do more of that and has done more of that in the past, but kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit this year. With Redick, getting so many looks and running so many plays for him late in games, and also, with Butler's ability to create shots for himself and for his teammates, that I think they think maybe they didn't really maximize him in that respect. Simmons obviously need him to be more aggressive and look for his opportunities. And, Josh Richardson, I don't know what they think about. He's a pretty good shooter, but he's a tremendous defensive player, and he's very athletic. He will really help them, on the wing. And he's another guy who can play multiple positions. He's a 2 and a 3. Really, just about everybody, everybody they have can play multiple positions. So, Browns can go small. They're going to be extremely big. Their first unit is going to be, incredibly, not quite as big as last year, but pretty close to it. So, he has some options, and, he needs to figure out a rotation, who comes out. You keep Horford in, take him beat out 6 minutes in. Does Horford move over to the 5 then? Then do you switch Tobias to the 4 from the 3? There's so many different things he needs to figure out in terms of a regular rotation, who works well on the court together, which 2 guys you can rest together, and you want to keep the other 2 or 3 guys out there, and there are things that will evolve over time.
Which I guess we'll start to find out with, maybe even starting Friday, with what kind of players Zaire Smith and Thibault are, to see what kind of part of the rotation they can be, because those 2 guys are being billed as really good perimeter defenders, that maybe they could be the guys that handle those 2s and 3s, but that means you're really dependent on 2 young guys who are limited offensively.
Yeah, I think, they'll probably get chances to play in the regular season, but my guess is, unless they add a backup point guard and a backup shooting guard / small forward who they really like, that those 2 guys could be competing for one spot in the playoffs, whether it's 8th man, 9th man, something like that, because they do have similar skill set, and they're more advanced defensively than they are at the offensive end. I was surprised. Look, Thibault's very thin. He was very slender today, more so than I sort of expected. And Zaire, knock on wood, if he doesn't get that parasite or whatever he had, that infection last year where he lost 40 pounds, he really looks good in terms of putting on muscle and weight and so on. But yeah, they have about a little over $7 million left, and they certainly have some needs, but they're going to need one of those guys, if not both of them, to contribute in the regular season. But then, Browns rotation's 9 or 10 in the regular season. Then the playoffs, you typically go down to 8, and that's really what matters. That's really your core, and that's the guys that are going to win it and lose it, in the postseason, when you don't play back-to-back, when you can afford to play guys 40 minutes a game and then have a day off and come back, the next day or 2 days later.
When you talk about Tobias Harris and his new role with the Sixers team heading into the 2019-2020 season, what's a realistic, production and role for Tobias Harris with this new team? Because I don't think you can say, all right, he now has to be the guy that takes the last shot and the guy that carries the team in the fourth quarter, although that would be nice. I wouldn't hate it. But realistically, for Tobias Harris, what would you like to see, with him now that Jimmy Butler is out of the picture?
Just that he's a more viable option late in games. I thought in the playoffs he was, I don't know if you want to say he was passive or he was just sort of overlooked, or there were too many more dominant personalities out there that were more involved. But I think they think he can do more, and I think he can do more, whether it's threes or, pull-ups or mid-range shots or whatever. I think, and he'll be playing multiple positions. He'll play some 3, he'll play some 4. Where does he fit the best? Where does he feel like he fits the best? And that could impact, rotations, end of game, who's out there. Is he or Horford on the bench late in games? Do you put one of the young guys in? And those are all things they have to. But yeah, 5 years, $180 million. Basketball-wise, you can certainly argue that Jimmy Butler was more worth it based on the playoffs than Harris was. So I think more things come into play there than just pure basketball performance and aggression and that kind of thing. So, but I do think they think there's definitely a lot more that he can do, and that without Redick and without Butler, he will have more chances to show what he can do.
Which, by the way, the Butler deal apparently is now finishing. There is a trade. Mo Harkless is on his way to the Clippers. It's going to be a 4-team deal. There's some things going on there. But, Tom, let me get your opinion. Do you think, number one, do you think that Elton did a good job of managing that situation? Butler basically, it seemed that if you're believing that side, that they weren't all that interested in bringing him back there to begin with, number one. So when he says, hey, I want to go to Miami, the return, did they salvage enough for giving up a player of Butler, or did it kind of work out where they didn't want to give him anything anyway, and we were just going to let him walk, so we got something for him of value?
Well, I think there's conflicting information. My personal belief is that they did not offer him the 5 years and $190 million. If they would have done that, it would have been interesting to see what he did. And maybe they told him they weren't going to do that, or whatever. But the fact that you got Josh Richardson, who's under contract for the next 2 seasons, and has a player option in 2021, 2022, and he's $10 million this year, almost $11 next year, and that player option is like $11.5. For in today's NBA, for what he does and his skill set, he's probably, underpaid. And then you have to realize with, essentially with some of that money they would have been given to Butler, a good chunk of that went to get Al Horford. So that wouldn't have happened if you re-signed Butler. You probably weren't going to be able to get Horford. There wasn't enough money unless you could have somehow worked out a sign and trade. And I don't know what they would have had that they would have traded out to get Horford back. So, I think if you look at it, though, if he didn't get Horford, I don't know who he's going to get. Who else is out there that was going to be a difference maker? You certainly weren't going to throw money at like the Knicks did with Julius Randle. He's another low-post guy. He really doesn't help you that much. As you saw on Twitter, some of the fans were a little concerned, and when they didn't do anything right away, and Redick leaves, and then you hear about Butler supposedly leaving, you're thinking, what is going on here? Why isn't anything happening? And, he was able to kind of take his time and, prioritize what he wanted to do. And it looks like, it's working out. But, to me, and that's what I'm writing a column for tomorrow, is what are they closer to winning championship, now than they were in May when they were playing the Raptors? And it's hard to say at this point because they need 1 or 2 more bench pieces. But if you look at their top 6, they're definitely better at the defensive end. Are they better at the offensive end? And like you guys have said, who's going to score? Who's going to take the big shot late in the game that Jimmy Butler was willing to take? And 3 or 4 times for the Sixers made them. So and obviously what happens with Kawhi if he stays? The East, Danny Green stays or whatever. The East is you got to go through Toronto. If he goes to the Clippers or the Lakers, now all of a sudden the East is fairly wide open.
And it's fairly wide open for this season because, next year, I don't want to say it's not going to be open, but Kevin Durant's going to be in the Eastern Conference for the first time ever. So it seems that if you're trying to win a championship right now, you've got to put your best foot forward. Do you think I like Kemba in Boston. I'm kind of a fan of that move for them, but losing Horford is a big loss for them. I like what Indiana's done, but I don't think that they're quite there. So it seems that unless Kawhi goes back there, this might be one of the Sixers' best opportunities to get something done.
Yeah, certainly. Like I said, if Kawhi goes, you can argue they have as good a chance to win the East as anybody. And, Elton Brand, when he made those 2 trades last year. And, when you guys were saying about with Harris and re-signing Harris, to me, the fact that you gave up 2 first-round picks plus 2 future first-round picks for Harris in February, as well as, the Landry Shamet, who started for the Clippers in the playoffs, that was that's a lot to give up for a 3-month rental. You can say that Butler giving up Saric and Covington is a lot too, but they, Covington had a pretty significant contract that was just kicking in that I think they wanted to get out of long term. So yeah, it's just a really interesting situation, and there's still some moving parts, and they still need to add a piece or 2. It looks like Nerlens Noel, I think, is going to stay in Oklahoma City. That was another possibility. Maybe they could look at Trae Burke as a backup point guard. He's a decent shooter. Not a great player, but he'd certainly be the best, whether it's Shake Milton or whoever they're looking on the current roster, he's more NBA ready than they are. You need another big body. You need a shooter off the bench, hopefully, or somebody who can score off the bench. I think Wayne Ellington, I believe, signed. He's another guy that they could have perhaps looked at. I thought I'd been interested in him last year. So, they still have a few holes to fill, but the core and the first 6, looks pretty good right now.
Tom Moore, columnist, covers the 76ers, and, of course, they are right now a big, very interesting mystery. What will be the next move? Because as Tom's kind of chronicled, they still have a couple pieces. How much money left, Tom?
I think it's a little over $7 million. It sounds like so. It's a little more than the mid-level exception. So if there's somebody they really like, but I'm not sure who or what. And some of them, some of the dollar figures are still pretty high. So I don't know if there's somebody, or maybe they could split it up with different guys. Give guys more than the veterans minimum to try to bring in a couple more, quality bench pieces, which you're probably going to need, especially if with Embiid, if he does the Kawhi and doesn't play in back-to-back games to try to be ready in April, May, and if they're lucky, June.
All right, Tom, we appreciate the time as always, pal. And Summer League starts on Friday. We'll get our first look at Matisse Thybulle. And for the most part, we'll get another chance to see Zaire Smith, which will be fun for the fans. So we'll be looking forward to that. Tom, we appreciate the time as always, pal.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. Take care.